Hello and welcome to the next in the series of AI and Democracy webinars hosted by the UK Democracy Network and Anti-Parties. Thank you so much for joining us today. So a little bit about your host. The Democracy Network works to strengthen relationships between connections, organizations, projects, and individuals working to build a healthier democracy in the UK. The network is open to all of those working in and around issues of democracy, power, and voice in the UK, providing you with the resources, information, collaboration opportunities to take your work to the next level. Anti-Party is a pro-democracy movement born from the Partygate scandal, looking to transcend the two-party system by applying collective intelligence for systems change. We want to empower individuals to collectively contribute towards positive change and restore hope by reimagining a system that works for us and not those in power. Through a combination of art and creativity, experience, and expertise, we seek to inspire new solutions to old problems. So I think there's a few things in the chat already. And I'm going to put a link to the AI and Democracy WhatsApp group if you haven't joined that already, or maybe you know people who would like to join or who'd be relevant to join and you're in the group already, please do share this WhatsApp group with them. Just letting more people in. And yep, so my name is Bella Roberts. I'm the founder of Anti-Party, and I'm so pleased to introduce Ethan Walker, Manager of Programs and Partnerships at Cortico. And as we dive in, please everyone put in the chat just who you are, a brief intro, just so we know who's in the room today. And without further ado, handing over to you, Ethan. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Bella. And it's great to be here. I'll say good morning, because that's where I am in Southern California, but it's good evening for pretty much all of you. As I was saying to Bella before this, I think something like this session has been in the works for almost a year. So I'm really glad to be here, chat with all of you, and then as Bella mentioned, to hear from you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a little bit, and then just to introduce who I am and Cortico, where I work. So as Bella mentioned, my name is Ethan Walker. I'm a manager of programs and partnerships focused on government work with Cortico. And Cortico is a nonprofit that works very closely with the MIT Center for Constructive Communication, which you can see up on the slide there. And together, our two organizations work together to develop new ways to listen to and to understand communities. So we're on a joint mission to bring underheard voices into the center of stronger civic spaces. And really underlying that is this belief in that hearing the humanity of others is necessary for democracy to function. So us at Cortico, we work on taking some of the research and some of the tools that are developed at MIT Center for Constructive Communication and bringing that out into practice. As you can imagine, the researchers at MIT have all sorts of different projects that they have in mind. They're exploring all sorts of different ways to improve the way that people talk to each other, to analyze and understand what conversations are going on. And then at Cortico, you'll learn a lot more about our particular approach, which is a combination of a very human-led, human-centered approach to conversations built on small group dialogue, but also it includes a technology component to help amplify the power of people's voices and organize and share out to larger communities, to other stakeholders, to leaders, what community members are saying. So that's just a little bit about who we are in the two organizations that I'm here representing today. Do want to back up a little bit to talk about what the plan is for today. As Bella mentioned, we've got a lot on the agenda. It's a bit ambitious, so we'll see how it goes. So appreciate all of your flexibility on this. But the first thing we're going to jump into in a second, after a little bit more of an overview of who we are, is a demo activity. And I know a couple people mentioned already in the chat that they've got a couple things going on, which is totally fine. Not everyone has to participate. There will also be an opportunity to observe what's going on, and then we'll come back together after splitting into breakout groups to have a bit of a discussion about what that experience was like. But we figured that the best way to learn about our approach to small group dialogue you'll see that we really emphasize the power of individual stories, people's experiences and perspectives. That it's a recorded conversation, and then I'll explain how those recorded conversations integrate with the Fora platform, which is our technology platform for storing, analyzing, and then sharing out people's voices as well. So this is the plan for today. We're going to do that demo conversation. I'm going to dive a little bit more into an overview of our process, case study, just to give you something to latch onto. And then, because I know many of you are probably interested specifically in both AI and citizens assemblies, and we'll touch on that, as those are some of the things that we're looking at in the future and starting to work on. And so, if we aren't getting to that early on, hopefully you stick around, and would love to hear your thoughts. Having experienced the process, thought a little bit about your work, and then want to ideally save a good amount of time at the end to just have more open discussion. Also, of course, address any questions that you have. So that's the basic plan for today. And again, to feel free to put any questions in the chat as we go through things. I will do my best to monitor them, and then Bella, if I'm missing anything, please let me know. So just a little bit of background again on Cortico's approach. So I mentioned a little bit about our relationship to MIT Center for Constructive Communication. We have a knowledge sharing agreement that allows us to kind of share the research to Cortico, and then what we've learned from working with partners, which include, I focus on government partners, so city governments. We have some US federal organizations. Then there's also a lot of work in groups like this that are working to bridge divides, to innovate democracy, things like that. But we also work a lot with schools, with students and educators, working to amplify youth voices. We work with journalists. We have a project, if we have time, I'd love to talk about that we're starting, that's around integrating AI and our AI support tools into work with journalists. We'll get to that maybe at the end. So we work with a wide variety of different organizations to, again, leverage the power of the human voice and the human listening, supplemented by an intentional process for meaning making, as well as in a set of technology tools to support that human process. So by combining the expertise and perspectives of community members with that process and those tools, we aim to support this collective understanding in ways that aren't just about bringing people across divides to sit together at a table. There's a place and time for that, but we also understand there are a lot of reasons that this sort of typical engagement or bridging divides work doesn't always work the way that we all hope it does. So that's a little bit of a preview of what we're all about. And again, we'll get into a lot more detail after the demo activity. So just to tee up what we're gonna do now, we're gonna break up into two different groups. And there are gonna be a couple of different options. Our Cortico's conversation process is built on small group dialogue, so typically about 4 to 6 people. Those conversations are recorded, then those recordings are uploaded into the Fora platform, which we'll explore in a little bit. But to give you a sense of the sort of Cortico style conversation, we're going to break into 2 breakout groups. Bella's going to lead one. I'm going to facilitate the other one. And there are going to be 2 different options. You can be a conversation participant. You'll basically be asked to share your perspective, or you can be an observer if you've got stuff going on, take notes on what you're hearing, how this might differ from some of the other kinds of conversations or community engagement approaches that you've seen in the past. And then we will compare notes after about 20-25 minutes. Does that sound good? Are there any questions about anything so far? Also great to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat.
yeah, looking forward to
All right.
actually, yeah, getting everyone interacting with each other. And yeah, we have me and Ethan will have these conversation guides to hand as facilitators. And I had the pleasure of accidentally joining a conversation workshop when I think your team were training up the student assembly, and it was just so impressive from both sides actually. So the facilitation using the conversation guide, but then also the young people and how articulate and comprehensive and just with conviction, they were really saying their piece. So chance to put them to shame or show us what we've got. And okay, I'll generate the breakout rooms now, but also wanted to draw some parallels with the SAFE principles. Ethan, is this the right moment to drop that in there?
Go for it.
Yeah, so the SAFE principles is the outcome of my thesis on collective intelligence to enhance democracy. And that's SAFE with 2 A's, stands for space for silent contemplation, ability to change one's mind, active listening and feeling heard. The F is feeling connected as part of the whole, and the E is epistemic growth as well as epistemic humility. So that means knowledge gains and improving your understanding about like the subject, but also other people's perspectives, but then also epistemic humility in the sense that, being really aware that there's still so much more to learn and a lot that we don't know. So these principles came out similarly, I was researching deliberative technologies and seeing the direction it was going in, and really wanted to bring in some human-centered principles as to the design and implementation of that, and really, really cool to see Fora sort of, going in that same direction as well. And one of the good guys. So let me put these breakout rooms up now, and I think there'll be one breakout room and the one main room just in case there's any late joiners. So let's see. Nice. Okay, well, yeah, I think our group ran over a couple of minutes, but hope we can all still keep to time. But I really enjoyed that. I hope everyone else did, but we'll share some feedback in a sec, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear, and I think we can just open this up to anyone. This includes observers or people that were participating in the conversation. I just love to start by just asking how that experience felt. Again, from whichever perspective you were from. I know we had some interesting conversation in ours, and would love to hear if there were particular things that people shared that resonated with you. And this, again, can just open up to the whole group. If you want to come off mute, put something in the chat. We can just have this be an open discussion right now for a few minutes.
Yeah, maybe raise hand if you want to share any of your experience from just now, and then everyone who was drafting some observing and reflective notes, fire away into the main group chat now. If they're ready, that'd be great. You can start reading some of them out as well, or please raise your hand if you want to read your own reflections out.
I'm trying to raise my hand, but I think I've got the setting on that it's supposed to recognise my hand gesture, and it's not recognising it. But anyway, so I wasn't really expecting to say something quite so personal about my life, so I thought that was a very good opening question.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if anyone can see the values from room 1, which I posted, but maybe that was just in my breakout room, but I'll copy it again here. And I'd be interested to know what were the values from room 2.
Yeah, I'll share ours. I always have to watch myself when I'm facilitating a conversation because I'm so interested. Like I want to take notes, but I also want to be present for what everyone is saying. So luckily I did take notes on this, but yeah. Anyone else have other experiences they'd like to share? I saw a couple in the chat.
I'll read out the comment from ND. So as an observer, I notice personal stories are a great place to start in order to understand where a person is coming from. We tend to start with dry facts about ourselves. It doesn't really give you a good sense of a person. The emotion and vulnerability that surface while telling an experience creates compassion and maybe more of a willingness to hear somebody, even if they have different values to you.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think it was so nice as well how you kind of reminded us that we have time, because so often we think that we're in a rush to, you know, use few words. And sometimes I find I tell stories really badly if I'm trying to rush through them. So I'm trying to take up less airtime, and I end up just telling a bad story, really. So I think that was really good.
Oh, I wish I heard your story, Natasha, but I'll watch the recording back.
You've heard it a million times.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, timekeeping definitely important. And I don't know if anyone here has done the knowledge cafes with David. That was an in-person event. Yeah, I did back in May, and that there's no timing with those conversation circles. And I don't know if anyone here who's joined those events, for example, have had the similar feedback where it's like, you know, we're talking in these circles, but we don't know how much time is left, and that can be create a lot of pressure or confusion. But yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, any other reflections from the observers or anyone who was speaking? How did that feel for you? And yeah, did you expect to share anything so personal? Did you know a memory or a story come to mind that you hadn't thought about before or hadn't really reflected on before, and you discovered something new about yourself?
Just a quick one from a speaker. Yeah, I totally agree. It's really powerful to lead with something personal, and the more vulnerable, the better. I think that's super interesting in the world of politics, especially from leaders. So it made me want for more, because it felt like it wasn't actually really a conversation. I mean, because the conversation didn't have that whole. It was more like little vignettes, and the desire that I have is to weave it all together and have conversations about it and build off each other and enrich. So that's my longing for the next thing, and that's not a bad thing. But I was craving for that weaving and conversation and going deeper. Yeah. Thanks.
I love that. I'll put in the chat the conversation guide that Bella and I were using. I will say too, generally speaking, our conversations are more like 60 to 90 minutes. And so usually there is more time to have a couple different questions, explore a little bit deeper, do some of that back and forth. So this is more of just giving you a taste, but glad to hear that was your experience.
Nice, and thanks, Giles. We've got another reflection here. I loved hearing everyone's voice and experiences. We all have a common root, and it's about finding spaces, physical and virtual, to reinforce this shared understanding. The problem is we don't have time to do this with 8 billion or so people in the world, or is that just in London? Do we need a more minimal non-verbal interaction to find this deep connection more quickly? Words can't even necessarily explain these deeper feelings, or can this all be scaled up to allow everyone to speak? Would love to hear more about the Cortico technology, which is an amazing segue, which was not pre-planned. So thanks,
Yeah,
Giles.
that's an incredible segue. I don't think I could have come up with a better one if I tried. So, all right. You know, coincidentally, next on the agenda is for me to give a quick overview of our process and the platform as well. So again, conversation guide is linked in the chat if you want to see how we kind of structure that. You'll see that there are some instructions for facilitators. There's the outlines for the questions, things like that. But in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen again and talk a little bit more about our approach and our platform. And I'm going to remember to share with sound, because listening is very important. That always asks me my password. So I wanted to start by doing a very similar thing to, I think it was Giles mentioned, around the root that we all kind of share. And this actually was mentioned by a partner of ours. It's a labor union in California. Mentioned that they're really into, they're a communications person, and they're really interested in word etymologies. And so she mentioned that the etymology of the word conversation is living among, or familiarity and intimacy. And I love that as kind of a starting point for thinking about what we're about at Cortico, what we're trying to do, what so many of us on this call are trying to do, which is having conversations that encourage us to be able to better live among one another. That could be from a kind of belonging and addressing loneliness. That could also be more from a policy and how do we kind of organize ourselves as a community. And so I think that I just love that so much, and I find as many opportunities as I can to share. Obviously, our colleagues at MIT, their whole their center is the Center for Constructive Communication as well, and I think that sort of constructive conversation is something that really underlies a lot of what we're trying to do. So I mentioned earlier that we believe that hearing the humanity in others is necessary for democracy to function. But I also think we've all experienced some of the standard ways that the community is engaged or not engaged. And the sort of general sense of not feeling heard. I know that came up a couple of times in our breakout group. Or at least unsatisfied with the extent to which that individuals feel that they have an impact on broader trends or policy or decisions and things like that. And so this is really where our approach aims to come in, not to be the end all be all of all engagement, but to supplement existing practices and help shift the dynamic between institutions and communities, between within communities, between leaders and individual community members, and invite people into a different and more effective kind of conversation that really emphasizes the power of people's individual voice and then the power of people listening to those voices in order to drive understanding and uncover the trends across people's experiences. And so there are three aspects to our conversation approach, which you've now experienced. And so again, by having these small group recorded conversations, you're able to reach people who may not show up at typical forums, who may not feel comfortable staying in front of a microphone at a town meeting or a sort of larger forum. You can reach people in a group that they trust and can share a little bit more what can be vulnerable information. You've also seen that we ask about people's experiences and perspectives as opposed to maybe policy opinions or things like that. Again, there are ways, the way I tend to think about it is what's kind of underlying a person's particular view on how should this, this transportation policy or something else. An example I'll show you in a minute. Do you believe in this proposal or do you not believe in this proposal? You can ask that question, but you're not going to learn very much about it. But if you ask people about, what's it like commuting on this road, or how would you like what's your vision for the future of this community? You can get answers about specific things, but also understand the bigger picture and start to build something that's lasting. And then the last thing too, again, is empathy and connection as opposed to division and intolerance. And again, this came up in our discussion, but I think if you listen to people sharing their stories, I think it was Andy that was sharing, people have their individual truth that they're sharing, and there's not really, if Bella is sharing something about her experience, it's not really up for debate. That's her experience, that's her perspective. And you can start to pull out actionable insights by doing that at a collective level. And so the process for building on that approach is, again, the recorded small group conversations, which you've now seen and heard. And then where it starts getting into our technology and our analysis process is what we call sense making. So it's community powered because you're bringing people's voices together, but also you can bring in community members to do this work. We have a number of partners, and we always encourage partners when they can to bring in the participants, bring in community members, so that's not just reinforcing consistent hierarchies. Again, sometimes that's what's required, and that's fine. And you're already taking a step forward by, intentionally listening to community members. But this is a much more down-to-earth approach to, maybe what otherwise would be qualitative analysis or something that might require a degree or a course to go through. And then the digital tools, again, you'll see that in a second. But the digital tools and all of the sort of AI and things that we're building into this are really about supporting the humanity of this process. And so that doesn't, and to sort of preview, that doesn't always mean it makes things faster. It can, but it's about what are you using technology to do, and is it serving the broader purpose of making a more human process. So this is a very busy slide, but what I want to get across is those 3 boxes up at the top. If you want to know, like, how does a project actually work with us, this is kind of what it looks like. The first step is to design the kind of conversation that you want to have. So understanding who do you want to listen to, who needs to hear from those people, what do you want to ask them, how do you frame questions in a way that gets you useful answers for what you're looking for. Again, we talked a little bit about those conversation prompts already. Once you've held and recorded those conversations, you move into the sense-making phase, which is, again, I'll show you in the platform more so how it works, but there are a few steps. One is reviewing each individual conversation, which is an interactive transcript, so you can listen to it at the same time as you review the transcript and pull out conversation highlights, so the sort of substantive part of those conversations. And then from there, once you create conversation highlights, what you're able to do is sort those highlights by themes. So as you're listening to these conversations and creating highlights, you're starting to get a sense of what are the themes emerging, what keeps coming up across a set of conversations. And so for those of you that do have more of a qualitative analysis background, this is more where something like a thematic code book comes into play. So what are the main themes? What are the sub-themes? And from there, it's about taking those themes and applying them to each individual highlight. So what you get out of the sense-making phase is both the high-level set of themes and sub-themes emerging from the conversation, as well as what we call a set of tagged highlights. So you've tagged each highlight with the relevant themes and sub-themes that have come up. So you've got a very granular, detailed understanding of the conversations. You can see how many times certain themes or sub-themes have come up, but you've also got that sort of high-level takeaway of these were the things that came up across conversations. And from there, it's really about how you want to share this back out. Again, because the human voice is the kind of consistent piece throughout, there's the conversation itself that's recorded. When you're making highlights, you're listening to the conversations, you can play highlights at any time. Who do you want to share that to? How do you want to share that out? Do you want to share individual highlights as part of a report or a presentation so that you're bringing people's voices into that? What might otherwise be kind of a flat text summary? Do you want to create medleys of people's voices? Do you want to create a portal, which is something that I'll show you that kind of summarizes the whole set of conversations? This is all really about building a more direct line between a community member's voice and whatever outcome you're hoping to achieve. So with that, I want to talk quickly through a case study, and I have very little time, but I will do my best to share an example of a recent project in Boston that we supported. So I mentioned the example of transportation earlier. In the city of Boston, they have this area called Blue Hill Avenue, which is one of the busiest transportation corridors in Boston. As you can imagine, with a city, a big city like that, you're dealing with a number of issues around congestion, safety. There are pedestrians, there are bicyclists, there are buses, there are individual cars. There are a lot of different issues, but in addition to that, as the transportation department was approaching redesigning this area, there's also the sort of cultural context where there's an understanding that this area is an area that's dealt with perceptions of disinvestment from the city for decades. There's again there's a understanding, or there's a sense that they've been neglected. The whole urban planning process feels like has passed people by. Again, there's the sense of not feeling heard or understood. And so the transportation department took a different approach that really emphasized community members' expertise. They brought in a variety of different community leaders to help build an approach that was more about sharing planning power and gathering people's perspectives. And so we were brought in to support this. Again, you can see at the bottom here, there were a whole variety of ways of doing engagement. Again, I don't pretend that the way we approach things has to replace things like quantitative data, right? There still is value in surveys and individual interviews and things like that. But by adding these small group recorded conversations, you'll see that the city was able to more directly draw a line between here's what we heard, and here are actual people's voices providing evidence for what we decided to do as a result of those findings. So one other component that's important here is that the city committed to making a decision that responded to community feedback. And so again, by having recorded audio data, you could sort of cite your sources in a sense. So I will finally show you the conversation or the Fora platform. So Fora, as an aside, is the plural of forum. That's sort of the idea behind our conversation platform. So the first thing I'm going to show you is what one conversation looks like in the platform. So you've held your conversation, you've recorded it, you've taken that audio file and you've uploaded it into the Fora platform. And what you can immediately see are a few things. One, just some basic information about the conversation, when it took place, where it took place. And you can see on the left-hand side here, each of the individual participants, and each of these gray bars indicates when that person spoke. So you can get kind of a high-level understanding of the conversation here. You can see it was only a 34-minute conversation, which is a little on the short side. But what I want to show you is the sort of first step of sense making, which is highlighting. So this is the conversation transcript. You'll see it's what we call diarized. So each person is individually recognized. This is sort of the first step or first place where AI comes into our platform. So there is a AI transcription here. You can also have human correction on top of this if you'd like. So you can see they're introducing themselves. And so the first question here is about the future of Blue Hill Avenue and your place in it. And the question is, what is your question about the future of Blue Hill Avenue? And so the first person shares their response. And because you're starting to get into the substantive part of the conversation, this is where someone created a highlight, which you just click and drag like you would in any other sort of place to create a highlight. From there, and so actually we can just listen to this really quickly.
So, like I said, I've been a lifelong resident. Bounced around a little bit when I was younger, but mainly stayed between Dorchester and Roxbury.
So again, you're reviewing the conversation, you're listening to it, and when you can create a highlight and add a little bit of a note about why that stood out to you. And so you'll see that this continues throughout the rest of the conversation. And out of this 34-minute conversation, there were 18 highlights that were created. And so when you create a highlight, it pulls out into this separate space where, again, you can play the audio again. You can share an individual highlight, whether on social media or download it. And you can also, again, just kind of review the individual conversation highlights. Where you start getting into the themes and things like that is in what we call the Insights tool. So the Insights tool is where you start to compare across a set of conversations. So you can see in this project, there were 23 different conversations, 600 highlights, and 152 people's voices represented in those highlights. And so as we look at the whole set of highlights, there are a few things to point out here. On the left-hand side are all the individual highlights. Again, you can see what conversation they came from, who's speaking. You can play the audio of those highlights if you want to listen to it again. And on the right-hand side is the code book, which is what in this case was all manually done by a consultant, the Boston Transportation Department, that was working on the community engagement report. But these are the themes they identified through listening and highlighting the conversation. So one theme is perception of travel safety, anxiety, and frustration. One is about transit access and reliability. And you can see all these themes have sub-themes within that. So as they identified these themes and started applying them to individual highlights, you can see each highlight has not only the themes that are relevant to each highlight, but also demographics, which you can track. So what language is the conversation in this case was English. They also tracked what their main mode of transportation was. So this person drives primarily. This person uses a variety of different forms of transportation. And so again, you've got that sort of high level understanding on the right-hand side that of what the themes are, but also at the individual level, where like which themes are relevant to each specific highlight. And to give you just a quick preview on where AI will fit into this, where AI is currently most developed in our platform is on taking a human-generated codebook and applying the relevant themes, or suggesting, I should say, that's kind of the key point, suggesting themes for each individual highlight. Again, the idea is that humans should be the steering this process. And so AI, see there's an AI suggestions up at the top. I go into an individual highlight, I can ask to suggest codes with AI. I'm not going to actually for this because they don't have AI as part of their thing. I don't want to introduce that. But what you'll see if you ask it to suggest codes with AI is it will take a look at the highlight and suggest potential codes that are either part of this codebook or additional codes that may not be represented in that codebook. And you'll see it shows up as sort of a dotted outside. So it's up to you to review and decide if you want to approve or not approve that highlight. So again, if you were approaching a project with no codebook, you had several hundred highlights and you have a small team of people, because that's often the case, this can help you with drafting an initial set of codes or building a codebook, but it's really about the negotiation, the back and forth process between, okay, AI saw something here, but is that actually what I'm hearing? Does that reflect what what I take away from this? So, there's a question around, efficiency here, and there's a sense to which it is saving you cognitive effort, but it's not necessarily faster. But you can feel more confident because you have someone to kind of go back and forth with. And again, this includes if there is a whole team of people too, right? So we really emphasize the importance of negotiation and collective understanding that comes throughout this process. But just to wrap up the example here, this is what we call a portal. A portal is an interactive website that gives you access to the whole set of conversations, but also the sort of high-level themes and takeaways. So these bubbles here you can see are represent each of the different themes. Again, we can see some of the themes we've seen before: perceptions of travel safety, anxiety, and frustration. But we can also explore both the theme itself from a bit of a narrative summary that also embeds people's voices. So you can listen to people's highlights about, for example, Jesse speaks of the feeling that the street is dangerous for everyone. You can also just listen to Jesse right here. You can also, if you want to explore the whole set of conversation highlights, view it from a more filtered lens of, okay, I work for the police department, and so I'm interested in people that feel that it's not safe, to ride the bus, for example. And I want to filter it to specifically people that ride the bus, obviously in this case. So I can explore all the highlights that are relevant to that. And you can do so for any other sort of thing that you're interested in exploring further. So again, to kind of wrap up this example here, what was important for Boston is that they shared community feedback in a way that was transparent, so that they could that there could be trust built in the process. And so by being able to directly share people's voices to explore the different themes, you kind of are building that direct line, as I mentioned earlier. I'll also put just in the chat, the mayor of Boston had an Instagram post that pulled voices directly from the portal, which I thought was very cool, and a way of, again, building legitimacy in the decision to what she ultimately did, which was a $40 million infrastructure redesign based specifically on the priorities laid out in the community's feedback. So again, this is one example of what a project can look like. We have many different ways of approaching our partners work with us, but I think what I wanted to emphasize is just the idea that real voices can be a practical source of policy tools. It's not just, there is totally value in the vulnerability and the openness and the sharing and the story collection. But there's also a practical element that when you organize and do the sense-making process and share back out, you can, make practical decisions that can influence policy and things like that. And so somehow, I think we're already at time. So I want to just pause, Bella, to make sure, one, that that's true, and two, see if where we want to go from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, time flies when we're having fun. Thank you so much, Ethan, for doing that walkthrough.
Yeah.
It was really, really illustrative and great to see it in action. And that's why, even though, we've been speaking for like nearly a year now, as you were saying, that actually, if we'd done this webinar any earlier, there might not have been as much to show and to say. So I think that, timing is everything, and this is definitely the right time. There are a few questions in the chat, so I wonder whether we could have a
I'm
quick
happy to stick around.
intervention.
Yeah.
Nice, thank you so much. So quick intervention for some Q&A. But I know that was there another short section of your presentation that you wanted to go through, if people have time, or
I'll send that, I think, in a follow-up.
yeah.
Basically, we're working on this process a lot with citizens assemblies, especially our colleagues at MIT. I know there's some interest there, so I'll share more information about that. There's a lot more detail on AI-assisted sense-making, which again, I'll send some more information there. But I want to make sure to have time for people to ask questions and things like that.
Yeah.
So this is a good place to start, and we can,
Right. And thanks so
share
much,
more
everyone.
later.
Nice. And thanks everyone for the patience. And if you don't mind hanging on a few more moments just to have your questions asked and answered. A few people are jumping off, but thanks so much, Nick and Andy. So good to see you. Thanks for joining. Richard looks like he's rejoining. And then I'll rattle through some of the questions in the chat. And there will be like a pretty substantive follow-up email anyway, right, with the like recording analysis, and then there's that future plan section of the presentation. So let me just try and do these questions in order. Quite early on, I think, in the earlier slides, Laurie was asking, could you possibly explain a bit more about the sense making? And then as you explained that it was, very human assisted and stuff, then the follow-up question around that is the selection of those humans, and the power actually that these human selectors can hold. And then when you mentioned the code book, again, who's creating that code book, so selection and diversity of those particular humans seems pretty critical. So would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I mentioned briefly about how AI can potentially suggest codes, but it's very much about, it's very human driven. And again, the question of who is part of the team that does that sense making work and codebook creation work, that's also up to partners to decide as well. So it can be a very open process. There's also, as you all know, an extent to which open can conflict with efficiency sometimes, and that can be important. But it's from our end, we're agnostic as to who is the one doing the sense making, but it's always, from the technology standpoint, about supporting the human-led process.
Thanks so much. Got a question from Patty on how accurate are the transcriptions? Have you found them to be? Maybe you've got a rate of accuracy in mind, and is it any better than Otter AI, for example? And then there's also another question from Flynn, but
I don't know specifics around like how it compares to Otter AI, but I will say like the machine transcription in my experience is quite good. I mean, usually it's the stuff that you need to correct, which you can edit, is things like proper nouns and names and the sort of stuff that might not be recognized, but in general it's quite good. It's not perfect, but it's and that's why we have a feature where you can edit transcripts as well.
There's always the option to correct transcriptions. Question from Flynn here: do you find much friction from folks about using AI for this? Do they trust the suggestions, or is it still rather a human sort of generating them? If Flynn's on the call,
I mean, there's definitely a range depending on the organization. I think the one example of a partner that comes to mind, they had a very tight timeline and like 700 highlights, And I think they accepted the suggestion about 70% of the time, which again, if you think about it, it's a suggestion that they've reviewed and accepted rather than just like click all and have AI do the tagging for. So there's definitely friction. It's again, and that's partly why we want to build in the back and forth negotiation piece, right? We don't expect or really want it to be the case that we actually, we built it so that it's not even possible for AI to do all of the work itself. There has to be a review of suggestions, but even then, we wouldn't expect that everything it suggests to be accurate, which is why we built in the review process. And accurate, again, is a bit relative, right? Because it may technically, I remember one suggestion from a project we're doing in a North Carolina, a state in in the US, is it suggested something about rent control policy, but rent control is actually illegal in that state, I think. And so it logically made sense that AI suggested that code, but it wasn't actually relevant to that state because it's not something that's allowed there. So again, there's the sort of negotiation is built into this for a reason.
Got it. Yeah. So it still seems to have a lot of human assisted intervention there. Yeah, thanks so much. I think, and if does anyone else, as the conversation's been going on, have you got any ideas maybe, from what you've seen so far? Questions. I mean, anything's possible with technology these days. Can you think of anything that you think you'd like to see, or from your other experiences, or other applications you've seen, maybe feed in some of the functions or features there? But yeah, does anyone else have any sort of questions or reflections? Feel free to raise your hand, and then you can just unmute yourself. But yeah, feel free to raise your hand. And I'd also just like to repaste, the values that the two groups came up with earlier today.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, I'd like to hold on to those. But yeah, if anyone has any thoughts or reflections, and I'll just repeat those values from room 1. It was trust, friendliness, openness, difference, and humility. And then in room 2, it was inclusivity, people's own expertise, empowerment, efficiency, and harmony. Just like, if only we could all live by those values and design technology around those values. And that's why, it's great to see, your sort of agreeableness towards those safe principles, Ethan. And I wonder whether, I guess that's a question for me, whether you've seen any similar sort of principles or frameworks for deliberative technology in general, or in the deliberative technology community so far. Has anyone sort of come up with a sort of core set of principles or values to develop this technology around? Apart from
I mean, those conversation agreements are really, they're up to each partner to decide on those. So I think each organization we work with tends to have a particular lens around the things that they value in conversations. And so, I mean, in general, we are less about telling or suggesting what partners should do around, we have certain suggestions around like the small group and the prompts that focus on experience-based sharing, but the particular questions partners want to ask and how they want their participants to think about the purpose of the conversation, that's really all about, it's really all up to them. So I definitely think there's room for like, deliberative democracy as as an area to think about what shared frameworks they want to use. But from our perspective, it's really up to each group how they want to approach it.
Yeah, got it. Well, you've been so generous with your time, Ethan. I think there might be one very final question in the chat that just came in here. Is there any way to use the tools for other projects? I'm presuming this means like outside, like citizens assembly, public discussion context. But Richard, feel free to elaborate if there's any other interpretation of your question. But Ethan, do you have any thoughts on that, like transferability of the tool?
I mean, the short answer is we have loads of different partners that use this for all sorts of different purposes, but I'm curious, Richard, if there's anything in particular you had in mind with that question.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of some time ago, I did some project that's called One Day on Planet Earth, which was basically coming together and people sharing stories about their week or their month on planet Earth. And I can really imagine using this tool to make that a little bit bigger, you know, kind of like a collective journaling, how it is to live on planet Earth, and then AI making some kind of highlights of that. The highlights of planet Earth for this week's are da 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 da.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I would say, I mean, that is definitely the kind of thing, again, right? If the purpose of the platform is to aggregate and help people understand at a larger level what's going on with people's, you know, that using people's voices as kind of the medium, that's a really interesting, you know, way to kind of think about it, right? And so, yeah, I think, again, the question, you know, the question around where AI is most helpful there, I think, you know, I don't think AI highlighting is, I think, a little bit less of a priority on our end, because again, like, at least as far as I'm aware, AI isn't at the point where it has the level of sort of human understanding of like, what is the relevant part of this conversation, right? The highlighting is about pulling out the substantive pieces. But if you were to say like, here are all, you know, here are all people's entries, and you know, can the AI tools suggest some themes that are coming out of it, and then you pull out individual voices that, you know, that you think best represent those themes. I think that's absolutely something you could do. And it would also be interesting, again, because it's kind of a repository of people's voices, to compare that over time, right? So what was, you know, what was living on planet Earth like July 29th, 2023 versus July 29th, 2024, 2025. I think that's totally the kind of thing you could do.
Nice. No, that's a lovely application, and it's great to hear that it's possible. Yeah, I'd like to see that happen too. So maybe we can continue chatting about that after this call. But thank you so much, Ethan, for, you know, putting all of this together. Like, you know, so much went into this, and just, you know, bringing together all the you know, not just the slides, but just like all the stories and case studies and demos and videos. That really appreciate that. We've got so much good feedback coming through already, and I think, yeah, and everyone loved the interactive piece. And yeah, it's one of the first times I think people in these webinars actually get to speak to each other as well. So already, you know, that's just demonstration of Fora in practice. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your time and attention today, and all the last people standing as well. Thank you for your patience, and yeah, thanks so much. I hope you all had a really great time, and please join the AI and Democracy WhatsApp group if you'd like. We're going to be uploading the recording there as soon as it's ready, and share the follow-up email with you all soon. And I think there should be a automated sort of Luma feedback form, as I'm sure loads of you are familiar with. So yeah, if you could just do a couple of clicks there whenever you've got the next moment, that'll be really great to keep these things running. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Bella. Thank you so much.
You.
Bye. Thank you so much, Bella.